Hello, hello, and welcome to this YouTube channel. Highly Sensitive Wisdom. My name is Susanna, and today's topic is decoding the matrix. So this is a continuation from last video, developing discernment. I'll put the link in the description so you can watch that if you haven't already. But first things first, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel, give a like to the video, and put your comments, your key takeaways in the comments to share with other people, so we can inspire each other, and also to let the algorithm on YouTube know that this content is valuable so that more people can, find it and watch it. Okay. So, decoding the matrix. The matrix has been, topic for many truth seekers for, a long time. And what I want to share in this video is the perspective and, the things I learned firsthand while living in France. I lived in the Parisian region and I worked in Paris. I ended up staying 7 years. That wasn't planned. But yeah, that's the time it took for me to learn everything I had to learn there. So I initially tried to leave, after a year, move back to Sweden, which is my home country, because I was just in shock. Everything was so chaotic and complicated, and people were so rude, and I didn't understand at all what was going on. And I have lived abroad previously in 3 different countries, and had very good experiences from that. So in my mind was like, yeah, living abroad usually is a great experience. It has been for me, those previous times. And I was very confident in my, ability and very, optimistic about what I would experience in France. I had no idea what life, with capital L, had in store for me. And yeah, life truly is the master teacher. And after trying to return to Sweden after a year, I couldn't create something new because I was quite, stressed out and yeah, more or less panicked. So it was very difficult for me to create something new in Sweden. I had to, go back to France and go there with an open mind, with a student's mindset. There's still something in my throat. I don't know what's happening today. So I had to go back with a student's mindset, like, okay, I am here to learn. Life is trying to show me something, and that was indeed the case. I had to be open-minded and, really try to get myself out of the way and not trying to do things my way, but, being guided instead. And yeah, that was a very revealing experience because, as I said, I ended up staying 7 years, so I have plenty of first-hand experience, to talk from or talk about. But this comes from experience. I'm not just doing some superficial analysis, some superficial observation. No, 7 years of in-depth conscious observation, and I also had several spiritual experiences there, a massive spiritual awakening that I could not have planned or foreseen. And I believe that spiritual awakening, I think that is my belief, at least. I believe that was God, um, wakening me up. So that was the exact right scenario I had to be in, both for my own personal growth and spiritual growth, but also for me to see things about the collective consciousness, the collective psyche. And I have chills now. Yeah, so oftentimes when we go through hardships, and those were 7 very hard years for me, and I have talked about that in previous videos. But I early on understood, because I have a well-developed intuition, even through the hardships, I was burnt out. I understood that I had to stop, and that if I hadn't been burnt out, I would have left, sooner, and then I wouldn't have seen all these things. And I came to an understanding that what we experience, now I'm having chills again, what we experience in our life, and especially intense, periods of time, that is not only for us. We are not only experiencing those things because we need to learn something, on an individual level, even though that could well be the case also. But life unfolds on various levels simultaneously. And one of the purposes is also to expand consciousness, the collective consciousness, expanding the consciousness of all of us. So sometimes life with a capital L, shows one of us or a few of us things that everyone needs to know, or a group of people needs to know, and they don't, we need to be receptive to that possibility also, and not only see our own perspective. So I did understand early on that I was in France not by coincidence. I had my plans, and those were not the plans that life had. My plans was I wanted to become a diplomat, and I had been in France previously in Paris 2 months studying French at a prestigious international, school, language school for foreigners. And I had had a great experience those 2 months, but I also realized I need to stay longer to become fluent in French. And so I moved to France. And yeah, spoiler alert, I did not become a diplomat. That was not, what life had in store for me. But that was, the carrot, the motivation for me to move there, because I was very, driven, in my career, and I, was a go-getter, and I really wanted, to achieve that. That was a dream I had, and I was willing to work for it. But seen from a higher perspective, that was not at all what life had in store for me. Rather, I was there to learn very deep life lessons that I couldn't have learned anywhere else. And those are some of the things I will share today, because what I learned was, how to decode the matrix. And if I share this, it's not only to, speak about France or Paris or the French. It's also to, so that you can get tools to analyze, your own situation and the situation in the country you live in, and you will probably see that there are common denominators in our collective consciousness, in our mindset, that is repeated all over the world. It's like a global phenomenon, and that is the mindset of lack. So, and the matrix, as you probably know, and as I have been saying in previous videos, the matrix keeps us up here. And while I was living in France, the pandemic, COVID hit. So I have been through 3 lockdowns. Many countries have. So depending where you are watching from, you may have had similar experiences. But in my home country, Sweden, there was no lockdown. So they are very foreign to the idea what it's like to be closed, in your home for 23 hours a day for weeks or months in a row. But yeah, I went through 3 lockdowns, and that also taught me, like, yeah, those lockdowns. And now I'm having chills again. Wow, something is important is being revealed through me, I believe. So the 3 lockdowns that I went through also were mere, at the same time, because yeah, life unfolds on various levels simultaneously. So those lockdowns were not only, the symptom of the pandemic. It also taught me, to what extent we are living a lockdown inside our own mind. So all through those 7 years in Paris, in France, well, I lived a bit outside of Paris, but I worked in Paris. So I commuted 3 hours a day. Yeah, that was also exhausting. But yeah, I couldn't live for long in Paris. It was just too crowded, too noisy, too polluted. Yeah, everything that highly sensitive people hate. The apartments are tiny and too expensive and all that. So I was shown, how the mind works on very deep levels, and how the mind is a tool that can be programmed and, used, both for us and against us. So when you think of France, usually if you don't live in France, you think of all the beautiful things that French people in history have accomplished, all the great, authors of great literature, or all the art, or all the, luxury stuff, all the fine arts, all the, sophisticated things. And those things also come from the mind. So we'll not, despise the mind in any way. But we need to understand that those are exceptions, those that confirm the rule. Those are not the standard for what France is, at least not contemporary France. I've probably not lived other lifetimes in France, I think, so I couldn't tell how it was, centuries ago. But that is the image that most people have when they arrive in France. They think of all the things that historically have given, a good reputation to France. The glamour and all the sophistication and all the art and all the literature and all the things. And even now, you associate, Paris with luxury, perfume and those kind of things. And the everyday life is very different. And I didn't see, everyday life while I was there for 2 months. I only saw it when I was living there. So when you live there, it's a quite different reality because, yeah, as everyone else, you go to work and you have to be crammed into a crowded subway and peak hours. Yeah, it's very stressful for highly sensitive people. And you see things that, well, you have to see. For instance, there are many beggars in the subway. And what I understood on a deeper level, and they only appear, they only show up in rush hours when the subways are crowded. They don't show up when the subway is, empty or half empty. Why would they? They wouldn't get anything from that. They show up when the subway is crowded. Then they have more probability of receiving something. So they show up in peak hours, and because you have to go to work, you have to you have time to you cannot take your time. You have to be at work in a certain moment. So you have to see that you cannot avoid it, and you're exposed to that daily, for year in and year out. And what I understood is that there are people who are living in misery and extreme misery, like those beggars who are mostly homeless and really desperate. And what that does to the collective consciousness is a constant reminder of, yeah, things could be worse. Things could be a lot worse. And therefore, you have to settle with less than you want, or you have to settle with less than you deserve. Because, oh, beware, you could be in their shoes. You could be the beggar on that subway asking for money from strangers and being desperate, and no one will hear you or see you. They will just ignore you, most people. And you could be that person in extreme poverty, extreme, misery. So beware. Don't, quit a job that you hate because you could become like those beggars. Don't quit an environment that is toxic for you, because what if you end up like those people? That's a constant reminder, fear-based reminder of lack and scarcity. And like, yeah, because they're so present in our everyday life, you cannot, you try to ignore them, most people, but it's like you can't really ignore them because they are there, in your face. And so that what that does to the collective consciousness is reminding us of lack and scarcity and poverty, and that keeps us in a state of fear, and that keeps us in a state, in a diminished state of being, because we are constantly alert. It's constantly have to be alert so that we don't fall into their situation. And then you look at the labor market in Paris, because so many people want to live in Paris. Let's start first with housing, because so many people want to live in Paris, because many people believe in the marketing and the glamorous narrative, and that's just that's not true. It's, yeah, for a selected few it's true. If you are a Hollywood celebrity and you have signed a contract with some prestigious house that that sells perfume like Dior or something like that, yeah, that will be glamorous. But for the masses, it's not glamorous at all. So then the housing situation is really bad. You pay really expensive rent for a tiny, tiny space, like for one or two people. When I was living there, might have changed since, I don't know. But when I was living there, a tiny, tiny apartment for one or two people, that would cost like at least €1,000 per month, or even €1,400 per month. And people would, accept it. They would settle for that because, yeah, they don't want to end up, homeless, like the beggars in the subway that we are constantly being reminded of. So people settle for less, and the conditions of some apartments is just horrible living conditions, and you are constantly in a very small space, and our physical space also impacts our mind and our ability to be creative and to see beyond the obvious, to see beyond the surface, and to broaden our perspective and broaden our ideas, or even be receptive to intuition when you're crammed in a small housing that is really expensive, and you're not sure that you can get anything better. That creates a lot of stress and a lot of frustration. And then you look at the labor market in Paris, well, in France, but in Paris in this case. There is a law that there is a minimum wage that employers have to pay their employees. And when I was living there, it was 1,400 euro or something. Fortunately for me, I never had to settle for that low. Uh, but many did, and for the same reasons. They were afraid that, the situation could get worse, that at least I have something, at least I have some income, at least I can pay rent, at least I have, some sense of security. But that's a false sense of security because it's fear-based. So imagine if you are living on a minimum wage of 1,400 something euro, and then you have to pay rent for at least 1,000 euro or more. And then you don't have a lot of money to, a lot of margin for your expenses, food and transportation and leisure. You have very few margins. And that way people can get stuck in very precarious situations, both with housing and with their employment. So there are so many people being very, frustrated and unhappy. And what happens then is that they develop severe passive aggressiveness. And and that's also why French people are so rude, not because they want to be rude, but often because they are in survival mode, and they are so, squeezed tight, both physically where they live and by, the harsh conditions in the work market. So the everyday life of people can be very reduced. And yeah, and that also, as we have been seeing with the subconscious, programming, that obviously that will cause all kinds of limiting, beliefs that are sabotaging people's efforts. And then because there is a huge, emotional component, as we saw in the video about subconscious reprogramming, and I will put the link below if you haven't watched it yet. We are taught, and even more so in France, we are taught that we have to be rational and reasonable all the time. Like emotions are sign of weakness, or emotions are like, yeah, no, you're an adult. You have to, be poised at all time. You have to, show off good appearances at all times. And the French culture is very much based on appearances. And the people are basically not allowed to express their emotions because they will be, you cannot be vulnerable at all because, yeah, people will eat you alive, basically. They would, I mean, the French are the most judgmental people I have ever met, ever. But also with those living conditions, how can you be, warm and welcoming and including you in the group and, and look after your best interest if they are merely surviving themselves? And then all these marketing efforts to keep the image alive of Paris that is glamorous and sophisticated, and um, so many people come. I mean, there are millions of tourists coming to Paris every year. I don't know how many people who move to Paris with that image in mind and that expectation, that they will have a really glamorous, sophisticated, successful, happy life. And the reality is so different from that. That's quite brutal. The contrast between those two, the image and the narrative and the reality that you find in everyday life. So there's a lot of frustration going on and a lot of, things happening under the surface, because obviously then all these subconscious programs will repeat themselves, like for everyone, but repeat themselves on autopilot, making it really difficult for some people to just, get out from it. So there is this, yeah, and for example, the emotional aspect. I read a book in France. Yeah, I want to show it to you because it's not really relevant for the topic. I just wanted to illustrate, like the book said that the French are the top one consumers of antidepressants, and the source didn't say on what scale, so I should think that it was on European scale, because there are many countries in the world with a much larger population than the French population, so it must, reasonably it must be in Europe, but anyway, so many people being depressed and unhappy and miserable, and there's no way of letting that pressure out from your system, because you have to keep your face at all times, you have to keep good appearances at all times, otherwise your peers will, there's a very strong sense of censorship between peers. And that is also what we saw in the film The Matrix, that there are like, you don't really know whom you can trust, because there were agents, um, camouflaged among the population, and you don't really know, um, whom you can trust, basically. So it's a very stressful way of living, extremely stressful way of living, and it's all, all of these components work together, both, the fact that we cannot express emotions but we still feel them, and because we feel those emotions, we will still have subconscious programs being generated, and the more intense the emotions, negative emotions often, the more of these subconscious programs will be generated, because there's no limit how many can be in your subconscious. Your subconscious is, very vast. So there's no limit how many subconscious programs you can have in your subconscious. So the more you feel very strong, negative or disempowering emotions, and you don't have any way to let them out from your system or express them or even acknowledge them, that will be very detrimental for your mental health. So we also observe in Paris a lot of people with mental health, even psychotic people. I had an acquaintance who was studying, a master in psychology in Paris. And so she said, like, yeah, we have this, exercise we have to do. We just go to the subway and, basically any, how do you say, any entry to the subway. And soon enough, you will see, all kinds of people with all kinds of mental disorders and mental ill health. That's very common in Paris. So clearly, it's not healthy for us as humans to live that way. It's not natural. It's very artificial, and it really reduces our expression as human beings. Everything is on a mind level. You cannot express your soul. Well, a few fortunate people manage to live off their art. But those are the exceptions that confirm the rule. The masses are locked inside their mind, both by the social and cultural conditioning, and because they are not allowed to express their emotions properly. And then also they are locked inside their mind, because the physical space they live in is so tight, in their housing conditions. And then again, many people stay in a job that they hate or can't tolerate, because because it's toxic. Because that really is toxic. And I don't say that as a judgment or as an opinion. As a psychologist, when I observe those things, it's really toxic to live like that. And then you have the environmental pollution. There was a joke in Paris saying, like, what was the weather like today? Oh, it was beautiful on several occasions. It was sunny on several occasions, and because the weather changes so much, it's very unstable, very unreliable, and very, very unstable. So the weather is just a reflection, in this case, of the human consciousness that is also very unstable, because the living conditions are so harsh. And you wouldn't think that in the 21st century, a country that has been, known in past centuries to be, a great empire and the place where so many brilliant things were born, the Renaissance and all those things, you wouldn't think that a country could reach that state of misery, And I cannot speak, about all the places in France because I know mostly Paris. And that is also, about the discernment part. When you believe in appearances, you believe the narrative. Um, yeah, you will be shocked when you learn what reality is really like. So because people are, as I said in the beginning, exposed, daily, they have to see people in extreme poverty, extreme, misery, homeless people who really have no hope other than try to get some, help from strangers. They have nowhere to go. And because you see that, so it's a repetitive phenomenon also. It's not just like, oh, if you see a homeless beggar in the subway once or twice, yeah, maybe you have empathy for the person, but that doesn't affect you personally because that's them and you are you. But because you see this repeatedly every single day, and you have to see that because you have to go to work, because you have to, have an income, you have to, you have to make a living. We all do, So you have to see that. And that ends up also brainwashing you in a sense because of the repetition of that phenomenon. So that is also what I wanted to point out, that reality truly is created on an ongoing basis. There can be narratives saying like, this is how things work, this is how reality works, this is how the world works, this is how you're supposed to behave, those are the expectations in your social or cultural context, and that's the end of the story. And that is not true because reality is being created on an ongoing basis. And to a large extent, as we have seen in the video about subconscious reprogramming, it happens in here, in the subconscious, in the mind and in the subconscious. So we are all contributing to creating the reality. And because there is so much exposure to fear, fear-based content in the news, and as I said in another video, I stopped watching the news altogether when I moved to France. And that was one of the best decisions I've ever made because I don't want to pollute my mind, my heart, my emotions with that kind of content. But we're constantly being bombarded with that kind of content, negative, violent, fear-based content. And when we are bombarded like that, both in the news, both, from our physical and social environment and cultural environment, and, it's just impossible to not get influenced. It's just impossible to not, be affected on some level. It's impossible to just say, no, I stay out of this. No, because you're part of it. You're part of the collective consciousness and you're a part of different human, cultural, and social contexts. You are part of that. And you both contribute with what you have in your database, in your consciousness. You contribute with that, but you also receive from the environment. And, energy is a dynamic dance between what's inside you and what's around you. So there is this dynamic, interplay between what's in you and what's outside you. And because the subconscious, because you're so repeatedly exposed to it, this repetition, both repetitive narrative, repetitive, exposure to shocking things that you wouldn't want to choose to see or to watch, but you're forced to, in those contexts, in those environments. So you end up creating also subconscious minds, subconscious beliefs in your subconscious mind about lack. And that is how the matrix keeps us in a state of lack and scarcity. And that is how the matrix keeps us from, finding our true calling, finding our, how do you say, tapping into our purpose, our mission, and expanding our consciousness, living in alignment with our soul, because we are trapped and locked inside our mind. And there are so many forces, and forces, that's a word that says a lot, forces that force us. We have not chosen that. We have not given our consent We have not said like, oh, I sign up for this, I opt in for this, whatever it is. No, I have signed up for this. This is what I chose. This is what I want from my life. No, we are forced to be exposed to those things. So we are forced. We are, it's being it's being done against our will, without our consent. And that is what I had to learn in France. And that is what I need to share also with the world, because there's so many countries, so many, places in the world with similar scenarios. And I could never have imagined this before I moved there, because as I have been explaining in another video about projection, we project our own stuff, both, negative, unowned stuff that we are maybe ashamed of. But we also project our good stuff, our qualities and our, our qualities, our good sides. So if we have a lot of good sides, and I would say per definition, most highly sensitive people have many good qualities and many good sides, we will project that onto the world. And the world can be a really harsh place because of this collective generalized mindset of lack and belief in lack. We live in a world that believes in lack. And that is not a natural law, that's not a universal law, that is not God's will, that is not a malevolent universe. No, that is brainwashing and subconscious programming. And when we understand that, and also, on a conscious level, because we're exposed to it on a daily basis, so what our eyes see, also, it enters our consciousness. We cannot, just turn away our gaze and think that we weren't affected in some way. Of course, we are affected. So reality is indeed created on an ongoing basis, both on the individual level and collectively. And so it's not written in stone. It's not like, oh yeah, it has always been like this. It also has to be like this. No, it's dynamic. It's dynamic. It's happening all the time, and that is where our power lies. Because when we say, okay, I didn't consent to this, I didn't choose this, I didn't sign up for this, and I refuse to be a part of this. That is where your power lies. When you say, okay, I will do my inner work, because I can only, I cannot change the world, but I can change myself, and I can transform myself from the inside out. And I can do what I can, to change my subconscious reprogramming or programming. And I will no longer be contributing to the collective mindset of lack. I will no longer uphold what the elite minority group controlling the world wants us to uphold, because we are being hijacked. Our minds are being hijacked. And it all happens, it looks like, we are choosing, because there's also this narrative like, oh, you are the master of your destiny, and from a higher perspective, that is true. But it's only true when we discover the mechanism working beneath, below the surface, when we understand in depth how the human body works, how the human mind works, how the world works, how there are hidden forces working against us, sabotaging our efforts all the time. Those forces are working, 24/7. They never stop. And when we understand that, then yes, we can be the master of our destiny. But as long as we are hijacked, we don't know that. And, the narrative is like, oh, if you find yourself in a difficult situation, that's because you chose it, or because you have created it, or because you wanted it. No, not necessarily. We didn't know we had another choice. We didn't know that we are more powerful than we have ever been told. We didn't know that there was a way out, you know. And that is the message I want to leave you with today, because otherwise the video will be very long. You are the creator of your reality. And when you understand how the mechanisms work against you, then you can reclaim your power. And that is what I want for you, that you stand in your power, that you can transform yourself from the inside out and transform your reality to your image, and that you will no longer have your mind hijacked, and your subconscious especially hijacked by forces who don't have your best interests at heart. So that is truly the message that I would like to convey today. You have more power than you know. You just need to learn how these mechanisms work so that you can start having them work in your favor, and not only in your favor, but also for the collective good. Because when one rises, we all rise. Because, energetically speaking, in consciousness, we're all connected, all of us, all of us in the whole wide world. Even if you don't know most of the population, personally, we don't have time for that, or we don't have access to that. But we are all connected in consciousness. So when one rises, the collective level of consciousness, it all rises. So yeah, that's a great thing that you can do, both for yourself and for the world. You want to change the world, change yourself first. All right. So I'd be happy to help you if you want to try the belief code, subconscious reprogramming, take back your power and start creating your life, and not from someone else's agenda, or not from a state of being hijacked, but from your own, power and your soul, your heart's desires. And that is possible. And, it doesn't take very long. In a few hours of sessions, of treatment, you will start seeing radical shifts and radical changes that maybe you have been working for years, or who knows, decades. You have been turning around circles, not finding a way out, and all the time the solution was in here. You didn't know it. All right. So I will drop a link in the description for if you want to sign up for a free consultation call. I'd be more than happy to help you. I've also, done this journey myself before becoming a practitioner. I know the ins and outs of it. I know what it feels like. I know, all the processing symptoms, and the different things that you might experience. And I'm so, grateful that I get to help you on this journey, and to be your guide in some sort. So this would be all for today. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.